down to the bones there. Phonics. Oops. What is phonics? It's as simple as that. It's matching shapes to sounds. That's it. So when we looked at that first piece of text, that was a whole load of mumbo jumbo, I said, right, when we read, we're cracking the code. That's what reading is. That's what writing is. It's representing the sounds that we hear, the sounds that we make on a piece of paper, giving the right shape, ascribing the right shape to the sounds that we hear, to the words that we hear, to the words that we want somebody else to hear in their head when we read them. Okay? So if I talk about encoding, we're writing, and again, the clue is there. Learning to read and write is cracking a code. So there it is, encoding, reading, decoding. Not like so reading and writing. This has to happen systematically. I could go off on the way one, but as with anything, if you've got a clear system in place, you know where you're starting, you know where you're going to end up, and you know how you're going to get there in between. Yes, there is an element of plate spinning. You've got to keep lots of things going, and it's not straightforward. It's not just linear, but you do have to have a system in place. And the system that we use that relates specifically to phonics. Phonics is where you ascribe those shapes, those squiggles, those symbols to sounds that you hear, to sounds that you want somebody else to hear in their head, is phonics. So that's what phonics is, the teaching of sounds and symbols to represent language. And we use a scheme, for want of a better word, called letters and sounds, which speaks for itself really. Those squiggles are, we know, as letters, and they represent sounds. However, this bit, I keep pointing like it's a whiteboard, it's not. This bit here, graphemes and phonemes, and I've had debates with staff about this, I have to be honest. Graphemes and phonemes sounds a bit pompous, but it's really simple and really straightforward. Grapheme, calligraphy, writing, telegraphy when you are sending your messages, they're the shapes that you ascribe, that you assign to a symbol. Okay, so they're your letters in effect. Phonemes, telephone, sound. So graphemes and phonemes, letters and sounds. So right from the word go, when we're using toy talk, and you might think, how bizarre, why would you use that language with a 3-year-old? As we do in nursery. In my bag is a, you can't see this, in my bag is a, what have I got in my bag? Got a, tell me, lovely, how many phonemes? Phonemes, why are you saying that to a 3-year-old? Well, because that's what it is. You tell a 3-year-old that that's a visualizer, it's a visualizer. You tell a 3-year-old that big grey thing at the zoo with 5 fingers in a trunk is an elephant, it's an elephant. They just accept it. So how many phonemes can you hear? 10. How many phonemes can you hear? Well, actually, it's only one phoneme, but there are 3 of them. Did you see what I mean? So if you use that language with them, phonemes, it stops this confusion between sounds followed by sounds. Do I mean a, or do I mean that shape, or do I mean k, which is assigned to that shape? So if we start using this technical vocabulary, it actually makes life easier. How many phonemes can you hear? 3. And the graphemes that we need to write N. So I've got 3 phonemes. Don't have to do it this way, but it's quite visual. Each phoneme in its own box, or each phoneme in its own cradle. Which phonemes do we need? What's the first one? Oh, look, we're back to that sequencing. If they can't sequence, they can't do this. What's the first phoneme? Hemp. The next phoneme. And the last phoneme. Invariably, when children first begin this process, they can identify, they can discriminate the first, and they can discriminate the last sounds that they hear, but it's the sounds in the middle that are the most tricky. So if you're doing anything like that with them, you might want to start with the first, then move on to the last, and then drop back into the middle. And again, looking at this process, you would never expect them to be able to write those letters independently. You could be doing that with, initially, you could be doing it with magnetic letters, or their pen can control might be quite good, but then they can't remember what a P looks like. So have that chart, whatever it takes to make them successful, help them with that. Okay, so phonemes, really important. Grapheme is just the shape that represents that phoneme that you hear. Okay, and I'm trying to go as fast as I can. Go back to our example of coat. Coat. And this is your Fred fingers is something which is really important as well. So when you're segmenting, separating it, count the phonemes on your fingers and you blend it. So if we could do coat, how many phonemes in coat? Oat, coat. So again, in that word, there are 3 phonemes. This is where you've got to think like a 3-year-old, not a 33-year-old or a 23-year-old who knows what the word coat looks like. But go with me on this. Oat. What's the first phoneme? So our grapheme is k. Oh, I know the middle bit's a bit tricky. What was our last phoneme? Oat. Okay. What was the middle one? O. Well, we know that there are lots of ways of writing O, but let's assume for now they've gone straight away and they know that it's OA. Lovely. Even though you've got 4 letters, we're not using the word letters. I didn't ask you how many letters are in it. I asked you how many phonemes could you hear and how many graphemes are. How have we got? We've had 3 phonemes. We've got 3 graphemes. That's one grapheme. That's another grapheme. That's another grapheme. So if I then say to you how many letters are there, well, there are 4 letters. Okay, so it's absolutely essential that we get into our heads, not be shy or afraid of these terms, graphemes and phonemes. It really demystifies the whole process. So use those terms if you're comfortable with it, graphemes and phonemes. So the rule is simple. If you've got 3 phonemes, you've got 3 graphemes. If you've got 5 phonemes, you've got 5 graphemes. You might not have 5 letters, you might have 12 letters, but you still only have 5 phonemes. Okay, so that's really important. We've got the word coat, so we don't need it in their boxes now. They're quite happy, they've moved on. They know it's k, o, t. When you've got one letter representing one grapheme, put a dot. If you've got more than one letter in the grapheme, it's a line. And then again, it would be a t. So again, you can play games with that. And the Morse code, I'm not quite right, making it little beep, beep, beep games. So I'm a word. Beep, beep, beep. What word could I be? Ooh, you could be bed. Well, let's try it. How many beeps were they? Beep, beep, beep. Ooh, 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 phonemes. So let's see, how many phonemes are there in bed, the word that you just suggested? Bed, 3. Yes, it could be. So it's about them, again, having fun, playing around, they're not being afraid. Use that language, graphemes and phonemes, it makes a huge difference. Okay? So that's what sound buttons are. You might have some words that come home from school that have got those sound buttons attached to them. I also quite like a little trick. I know I'm jumping from reading and writing, but they're reversible processes. You can't separate one from the other. In the early stages, children should learn to read and write almost concurrently. So we'll have a preference and a strength for one over the other, but they do happen simultaneously. You might have some words that are sent home to you with those sound buttons on them, or if you're looking in shops for games and things, you quite often find now that the books, the resources that you buy have got those sound buttons on them. But if I flip this round, if I was doing some reading, I did some training with some our LSAs the other day, and I just had a laminate, you know these ones, I don't know, the ones that you can run through a machine, this kind of stuff. I just got a laminate and ran it through a machine with nothing in it, just clear plastic stuff. Had some text, and I know that a child is going to struggle with, what was the word? No, that's no good. Let's do float. I know that they're going to struggle with that word in the text. Okay? And what I'm going to do is put this clear, transparent thing over the top of it and put the sound buttons in before we start. So they know that they need to break it up into 4 phonemes to help them. I might, in addition to that, drop on top of it. Now remember, O and A, say O, goat and a boat. Talk to you about that again in a minute. Okay? So just that little top tip. If they're struggling with some words at home, whiteboard pen, get a laminator, just nothing in it, laminating page, just laminate it without anything in it, and that really helps. That's like a magic wand for some children, and that I wish I'd known and thought about years ago. That's really helpful, using those sound buttons in all sorts of different contexts. Onset and rhyme is a little bit like that rhythm. If you know that that says at, okay, your onset there is, and your rhyme is at. So if I can write cat, and because I know what the letters are, I know, ooh, cat, mat, fat, a little bit like Daniel, my nephew, with poo, loo, zoo, sue, shoe. It doesn't matter if they make up nonsense words, it's about that sound. Cat, well then I can make pat, and I can make mat, and all sorts of things. So as soon as children have got most of their grapheme phoneme correspondence in place for the first 26 letters, if you like, in the alphabet, it can start very quickly making consonant, vowel, consonant words, CUC words, and then they combine that with this onset and rhyme, and hey presto, check me out, look how brilliant I am. I can write lots and lots and lots of words. Alright, so phase 1 is all that phonological awareness stuff that I just spoke to you about. Those fundamentals, those non-negotiables, alliteration, rhyme, rhythm, playing around with sounds, identifying sounds, discriminating sounds, and so on. And then we move into phase 2, and that oral blending and segmenting, that toy talk, that Fred finger stuff, whatever you want to call it. You don't just get out of, you don't just say tick, they can do all of those things, right, now let's move on to phase 2. You sort of do that, but you've got to keep all those things going. When you get to phase 2, it means that children can identify sounds, they can discriminate sounds, they've got that positional sequencing vocabulary in place. They're quite comfortable with rhyme, they can identify rhymes and they can have a go at generating a rhyme. Obviously generating your own rhyme is a little bit more tricky than just being able to identify one that you hear and just say, oh, that rhymes, although that can be difficult for some learners. What you then do is, in phase 2, you can see we've got 5 sets of letters. That first set, S, A, T, P, I talk to them quite rapidly. So as soon as they know, they can hear the sound S. They can hear S in sit, they can hear S in chips, they can hear S in, I can't come up with a word with S in the middle of it. We've got S in the middle. Anyway, let's imagine there is one and I knew one and I was prepared. So they can hear, and it's not just about these letters at the beginning of words. We've got to get away from that. It's not letters. Can they hear these phonemes in the beginning of a word? Can they hear them in the middle of a word? Can they hear them at the end of the word, and so on? You need to be able to identify them in different places. When we know they're comfortable and confident with all of that, we then start to show them that sometimes, often, usually, because it's not always, sometimes, often, usually, that phoneme is represented with that